And we're back on the Bill Face podcast. I'm your host, Mr. Ben, and on today's episode, we are going to continue my in depth boss battle analysis with photographic Thanos. However, before I get into any of that, a brief note of housekeeping. Over the last month or so, I'm sure fans of the show have noticed that the consistency has fallen off. I feel really bad about that. Generally speaking, I try to make sure I put out at least one episode a week or more. There are times where there's enough going on in the versus community to justify more than one episode per week. That said, there are also times in my life, such as the very end of the school year or around the holidays, like December into January, where there's a lot going on. And historically speaking, every year around these times, I have issues with consistency. So I think going forward, the next time I'm approaching a period where I know there's going to be a lot going on with work or a lot going on with my kids, I may have to just take a brief hiatus, take a short break, and at least set the expectation that hey, there's not going to be an episode every single week during these time periods. What I really don't like is when I feel like I'm letting people down, where the expectation is that I'm supposed to be performing and I just can't. At the end of the day, I am a husband and a father before I am a podcaster, and therefore there are just times where I have to put that stuff first. But I have not done a good job of setting that as the expectation. So going forward, when I know, hey, these next couple weeks are going to be crazy, I'm going to let everybody know up front and maybe just take a break during that time period so that way everybody knows what's going on. Okay, getting past all of that housekeeping stuff, let's dive right into talking about photographic Thanos. So there's a couple different paths with this main character, and before I get into the boss card, I'm just going to talk about the boss himself. So level 1 photographic Thanos is a 4/3/6. He has pay a blue and put a -1 counter on each enemy supporting character. Now this is one of those powers that is going to benefit from the boss battle format, in that there's likely to be more supporting characters in play, or were it not for his level up condition, it would be likely that there would be more supporting characters in play for him to be able to get more value out of that. You know, you pay a blue and you put one -1 counter on somebody, that doesn't feel great. Sometimes you have to do it, but that's not like a ton of value. You're paying a whole card for a single counter. I'd like to see at least two counters, and really probably more, particularly late in the game. You're going to want to hit several things with this. The problem here is his level up condition, which is fine, I'll do it myself. When Thanos KOs a supporting character, he gains XP equal to its cost. So he requires 6 experience points, and your opponent knows all of this information. So why on earth would you ever play into this experience condition? Like, you're not going to play 2 1-drops on turn 2 that each have 1 health, so he can pay 1 blue, KO both of them, get the 2 experience. Your opponent can be really careful, and particularly in the boss battle format where you have 2 opponents, they can structure their turns, set up their boards in such a way that makes it extremely difficult for this main character to gain experience. Certainly at some point, if the game plan is just don't ever recruit characters, that's not going to work out, obviously. But particularly if your opponent knows you're going to be playing this Thanos, they can just not recruit any characters that have, or not put any characters in their deck that have 1 health, or not recruit any characters with the 1 defense and 1 health, and really just make it so hard for Thanos to gain experience. And with a 4/3 stat line, if he's not leveling up until turn 5 or 6, he's probably dead with only 3 defense. So his level 2 version, one of his 2 level versions, is he retains Bathe the Starways with Blood, and he gains You Know What It's Like to Lose. Main phase, pay a green and wound each face down enemy main character. He becomes a 7/6 instead of a 4/3 and still has 6 health. I don't think you play this guy for this level 2. Yeah, there's certainly the 8-drop illustrated Thanos has proven that there are certainly times where the ability to pay a green and put a wound on a face down character is really good. The difference is 8-drop Thanos lets you hit all face down characters. This guy lets you only hit enemy main characters. Now, it should be stated that in the boss battle format, if you have the ability to put both enemy main characters face down and pay a green, this is going to produce 2 wounds on main characters, which is worth a lot in this game. So the upside, the Rainbow Unicorn Land version of using the superpower is actually excellent value. I just don't think you're ever going to get there. I don't think you're going to get there in 1v1 most of the time, and I don't think you're going to get there ever in the boss battle format. So the level 2 Thanos that you actually want to use is the one that came out a little bit later, and he at level 2 retains Bathe the Starways with Blood. Again, pay a blue, -1 counter on each enemy supporting character. He becomes a 7/7/6 up from a 4/3 as opposed to a 7/6/6. And Find Them My Children. Level up 2. When a child of Thanos appears on your side, Thanos gains an XP. When Gamora or Nebula appear on an enemy side, Thanos loses an XP. So let's take this in reverse order. Gamora and Nebula are not going to appear on the enemy side. That's extremely unlikely. There are not really that many versions of Gamora or Nebula that people really recruit that often, particularly at this point in the game. Yeah, the old 3-drop Gamora having lethal was definitely an option early in the curve if you really needed lethal, but there are other, I think, better options to satisfy that need now. And I can't think of a single Nebula that I guess the photographic Nebula is a little bit more playable than some of the illustrated, but generally speaking, unless your opponent knows in advance that this is the main character that you're going to be on, and they're packing below grade supporting characters specifically to try to prevent you from leveling up, I don't think that's that realistic of a fear, in my opinion. I'll touch on the Children of Thanos here in a minute, but once you recruit 2 of them and you get to level 3, let's talk about his level 3. He becomes a 9/9/7. I don't think the 9/9 is super relevant here because he loses all his other powers and gains Bring Balance to the Universe. At the start of your turn, you may reveal exactly 6 Marvel locations with different names from your hands and snap. If you do, half of all characters, KO half of all characters rounded up. A little bit ableist, I guess. What if somebody can't snap their fingers? Do they just not get to play this guy? No. Okay, I'm being silly. So obviously the ability to just straight up KO the enemy supporting or the enemy main character is the reason you play this guy. This is essentially an alternative win condition that isn't phrased as an alt win condition, but you reveal these 6 cards from your hand and you get a KO. In the half of characters that you choose to KO should be the main characters. So I think this is the way to go. The problem with this guy as a boss is that he requires so many things from your hand. Now at level 2, I touched on the Children of Thanos. I don't want to get too hung up on these characters, but I'll run through them real quickly here. The 4-cost one is Proximia Midnight. She's a 4/4/2, and she gets Berserker while Thanos is on your side. She has a main phase power that lets you push front row characters to the back row. Okay. Cull Obsidian is a 5-cost 5/8/2 who can, if he's defending a ranged attack, cancel that attack, and he gets monstrous when Thanos is on your side. Corvus Glaive is a 6-cost 6/5/2. He gets stealth, and when an effect can pay a red when an effect gives an enemy character in combat with Corvus Glaive +1 counters. Instead, they get -1 counters. Gains no +1s and no attack and defense. Sorry, I mean, they don't get -1s. They just don't get the benefit. So he can stop you from getting the benefit. And finally, Ebony Maw is a 7-cost 8/8/2 with flight and range. He gets lethal. Now, lethal on a 7-drop, Ragnarok has proven that that's good enough to see play. Like, that's all you need. Lethal is a really important, depending upon the format. There are different formats where there are the lethal options or fewer or more plentiful. But lethal on any part of the curve, I think, is something you should pay attention to. He also has Telekinesis. Pay a yellow and put the top card of your deck into your KO pile. Then put -1 counters equal to that card's cost on an enemy supporting character. If that wounds the character, KO it. Now, this is a little dodgy in that there aren't a lot of ways for you to manipulate the top of your deck in photographic. I Need Your Help comes to mind. And if you do this into a plot twist, it's like you're paying a yellow for nothing, which is terrible. So all of the Child of Thanos cards have kind of interesting stuff. They're all worth what you're paying for. None of them are like crazy awesome characters, but you need to hit at least 2 of them to the board in order to get the experience for this guy. Now, what turn does he level up? If he hasn't leveled up by turn 4 and the only child of Thanos you have is proximity of midnight, do you underdrop on turn 5? Do you underdrop on turn 6 just to get that experience? Like, these are some tough decisions you're setting up for yourself. And ultimately, the payoff is going to require you to have a big hand of cards as well. This is especially demanding within the context of boss battles. So, as we all know, when you are playing the boss, you have a bunch of effects that take place once a location enters play on your side. If you have to hoard 6 locations in your hand, and they all have to be different, so you need every single possible location you could get in the photographic universe, that because they're all Marvel. So you've got the hero wild, the villain wild, and then the 4 basics. You need all those in your hand in order to do his thing, which means you're not playing them to the row, which means you're not getting the boss benefit. So playing playing this guy as the boss to me seems incredibly difficult. What you're going to have to rely on is probably tearing your opponent's hand apart, which put a pin in that. We'll come back to it in a second. And things that allow you to have longevity. So goosing your opponent's characters away, using Heimdall to search out those children of Thanos that you need, Groot in order to keep wounds off of your main character, potentially Mordo, Killmonger type shenanigans to try to prevent your opponent from doing the things that they want to do. I would approach this very much with a control type of mentality, because otherwise you're probably going to die. With 3 defense, yeah, he has 6 health, but 6 health ain't what it used to be. Like, that buys you to turn 6, which is not that deep in the game when there's characters that are easily going to be able to put wounds on Thanos on turn 1. And when you think about it within the boss context, now in 1v1, if I attack with my main character and we trade, well, that puts us both on the path towards losing. But in 2v1, my team essentially has 2 main characters, so we can trade those wounds back and forth. So maybe I take a wound on my main character and put a wound on Thanos, and the next turn my teammate takes a wound on their main character and puts a wound on Thanos. And you can see how the math works out there, not in Thanos' favor very, very quickly. So if you're playing against this guy, you definitely want to stack wounds early. You cannot let him get to this revealing 6 Marvel characters or Marvel locations from his hand part of the game. So how do you stop him? Chip away at his hand. That's absolutely the key to victory. If this Thanos does not have a hand, nothing else he does matters. He's not going to beat you on board with these stats. At 4-3-6, the -1s that he's able to put out only target supporting characters. If your main character is big enough, if the 2 players on your team are both big enough, you could potentially even beat this Thanos without having to recruit anybody. Or any supporting character that you do recruit, you run them in and make trades to where you make sure your characters are face down on your turn and Thanos can't mess with them. This seems game, set, match. This is one of the main characters who I feel like, even given the specifics of what his boss card does, it puts him in a pretty tough spot. Now, there is the ability to accelerate experience with this guy if you're playing locations to the row. The Thanos boss card does give him the ability to KO characters outright, so he does have that sort of other way to get bigger. And at level 2, the level 2 that we want to go to, he does become a 7/7. And if he gets there quick enough, those could be relevant stats. But overall, I think the path to victory against this guy is ripping apart his hand, denying him the resources that he needs in order to get those experience, both locations and supporting characters, potentially denying superpower. Like, you put down a Mordo and all of a sudden the Heimdall Thanos played last turn doesn't look as good. Things like that. And this to me seems like one of the weaker boss selections within the context of playing boss mode like really competitively, which I will have some analysis on that. Once I finish going through each boss individually, I do want to talk about BPL 10 and overall what my thoughts are on kind of where boss mode lands. So that's all we got for today. I do want to say thanks to the patrons. If you like what we're doing here, patreon.com/thebuildphase. Thanks to the support from Christopher, Roland, Peter, Patrick, Justin, Patrick, Earl, David, Jason, and Brad. If you want to be part of the coolest clubhouse in Versus, patreon.com/thebuildphase. Until next time, go win some games.